The man who was once my father gave my son a crumpled receipt in a shiny gift bag, snorting, "Hope you like disappointment too." But 30 minutes later, the birthday cake exploded and everyone knew why I had avoided him for years. It's just one day, I told myself. It's his grandfather, my son said. So I let the man I hadn't seen in nearly 2 decades step back into our lives for my son's 10th birthday party. I knew better. But guilt has a way of distorting logic. What I didn't expect was for him to humiliate my kid, cause a scene, and then leave behind a strange, twisted message that made me realize he had planned everything. It started with my son Callum asking questions no 10-year-old should really need to ask. Do I have a grandpa? Why don't we talk about him? Can I meet him someday? It wasn't an easy topic. My father, Lionel, wasn't just absent, he was a storm that wrecked everything in its path. He was the reason my mother spiraled into depression and the reason I left Charleston, South Carolina at 21 with a single suitcase and a broken heart. But we are back now. I moved back into the city last year after my divorce. Callum and I were starting fresh. And maybe I was softer than I'd like to admit. I told myself it would be harmless to let Lionel come to the party. Just one afternoon. Just for Callum. I gave Lionel my number, told him the date and time, and left it at that. He didn't call or confirm. I assumed he wouldn't show. That was just like him. But he did show. Late, of course. Not fashionably, not apologetically, just late. He pulled up in an old rusted Dodge truck with a muffler that sounded like fire and parked across my driveway like he owned the place. I stood at the window and watched him step out like nothing had changed. He still walked like the world owed him. Leather jacket in the spring heat, sunglasses too big for his narrow face. I felt the old knot in my stomach tighten. He walked in without knocking. Callum had just finished his scavenger hunt. His cheeks were pink from running around with his friends. I was getting ready to light candles on the cake when I heard Lionel's voice cut through the chatter. Well, well. Look who's leveling up, he said, handing Callum a shiny silver gift bag. Callum took it, excited like any kid would be. He reached in and pulled out a crumpled receipt. From a liquor store. Just that. Lionel snorted and clapped a hand on his shoulder. Hope you like disappointment too. It's genetic. Everyone in the room went quiet. Kids looked at each other. One mom raised her eyebrows. My spine stiffened. I walked over, gently took the receipt out of Callum's hand, and ushered him away to go play a game with the others. Then I cornered Lionel in the kitchen. What the hell was that? I asked, keeping my voice low. Relax, he said, reaching into the fridge like he lived there. It's a joke. Your generation's too soft. You humiliated my son. He shrugged. He'll get over it. Might even toughen him up. I should have thrown him out right then. But Callum had been talking about this party for weeks. The magician had just arrived. The cake was sitting on the counter, pristine and perfect. I didn't want to ruin his day. So I bit my tongue. For Callum. The cake came out around 30 minutes later. I'd ordered it from a place my mom used to take me when I was little, Butter and Whisk on Queen Street. 2 tiers, vanilla strawberry swirl, chocolate controllers on top, green frosting that read level 10 unlocked. Everyone sang. Callum grinned from ear to ear. He leaned forward, made a wish, and right before he blew out the candles, boom. The top tier exploded. Not like an explosive, but like someone had jammed a glitter explosive, some kind of spring-loaded mechanism, maybe even CO2 cartridges, right into the center of it. Powdered sugar burst into the air, chunks of cake flew across the room, and a small plastic 10 candle hit the wall with a thud. Kids screamed. One little girl burst into tears. 2 moms ducked like they were under attack. A boy yelled, "It's poison." Callum stood there, covered in frosting, frozen in place. And Lionel? He laughed. Clapped his hands. Nearly doubled over. That was priceless, he choked out. I told the bakery to jazz it up. Told them to make it pop. They did not disappoint. I stood in stunned silence. I could feel my hands shaking. He actually did this on purpose. 4 laughs. I didn't say anything. I just walked up to him, pointed to the door, and stared. Nothing else. He chuckled again but finally shuffled out, still muttering about people not having a sense of humor anymore. The rest of the party limped along. Parents offered to help clean up. The magician made balloon animals. Callum put on a brave face, but I could tell he was hurt. Not just from the prank, but from what it meant. Later that night, I found him sitting on the back porch, holding that crumpled receipt. He was quiet. Thoughtful in a way no 10-year-old should be. Was Grandpa always like that? He asked me. I sat beside him and nodded. Worse. He handed me the receipt again. There's something on the back. I turned it over. It wasn't just a receipt. On the back, scribbled in thick black Sharpie, was a name and an address. Darcy, May 3rd, Whispering Pines Rehab. My stomach dropped. Darcy. The woman he left my mother for. The one with the garden gnomes and the vodka problem. Whispering Pines was a rehab center just north of town. About 40 minutes away. The date was a few days from now. It wasn't a prank. It was a message. For me. And now I had no choice but to follow it. I didn't sleep much that night. That crumpled receipt sat on the kitchen counter like it was ticking. I must have picked it up a dozen times, turning it over, staring at the words again and again. Darcy, May 3rd, Whispering Pines Rehab. I hadn't heard that name in almost 20 years. She was the woman who stood at my mother's funeral with sunglasses on and didn't say a word. She was the woman my father moved in with before my mom was even buried. And now, apparently, she was in rehab. I didn't know if it was some kind of sick joke or if Lionel actually expected me to show up. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was like he'd found a way to keep digging his fingers into my life, even after I told him to get out. I waited 3 days. Callum went back to school, and I kept busy with work. I cleaned the house, reorganized drawers that didn't need it, folded laundry that didn't belong to me. But the receipt stayed in the kitchen, untouched. On the morning of May 3rd, I got in the car without fully deciding to. I told myself I was just going for a drive. That I'd maybe stop for coffee. But I ended up on the highway, heading north toward Whispering Pines, the crumpled receipt in my glove box like a map I couldn't ignore. Whispering Pines looked exactly how I imagined it, old brick buildings tucked behind pine trees, manicured lawns, white rocking chairs on porches. Too peaceful. Like the kind of place where everyone smiles but doesn't talk about anything real. I told the front desk who I was. They asked me to wait. 10 minutes later, a woman stepped out of the main building, blinking in the sun. It took me a second to recognize her. Darcy. She looked older. Thinner. Less like the woman I remembered and more like a ghost of her. Her hair was still blonde, but dull now, limp around her shoulders. She wore a sweater even though it was warm. And her eyes, bloodshot and sunken, looked like they'd seen too much. She didn't seem surprised to see me. I told him not to do it, she said before I could say anything. I told him the cake thing was too much. I didn't answer. I wasn't sure why I was even standing there. I wasn't expecting you, she added. But he said you might come. Why? I finally asked. What does he want now? She sighed and sat on the edge of a wooden bench, motioning for me to do the same. He's dying, she said flatly. Liver failure. They found it too late. He doesn't have long. I blinked. That wasn't what I was expecting. Not at all. She lit a cigarette, her hand trembling slightly. He didn't want you to find out from some doctor. Said if you were gonna show up, it should be because you chose to. Not because someone told you it was time. I didn't know what to feel. Lionel had been a shadow over my life for as long as I could remember. He was loud, manipulative, selfish to the bone. He drank too much, lied too easily, and never took responsibility for anything. And now he was dying. I almost laughed. Darcy looked at me sideways. He's not asking for your forgiveness. Don't worry. He knows he burned that bridge. I stared out at the pine trees. Then what does he want? To be seen. One last time. We sat there in silence. A car pulled up and dropped off a woman who looked like she hadn't eaten in weeks. Someone across the lawn was crying into a phone. It all felt surreal. He told me about the receipt, Darcy said suddenly. Said he wanted to send you a message without saying it out loud. That he didn't deserve a phone call or a letter. That he just wanted to let you decide. It hit me all at once, how carefully orchestrated that day had been. The prank cake. The gift bag. The receipt. It was a breadcrumb trail. Not to redemption, but to reality. He was dying. And he was still too proud to say it like a human being. I left without seeing him. Not that day, anyway. Instead, I drove back home, stopped at a gas station, and sat in the parking lot with the receipt in my lap. It was smudged now, the writing starting to fade. I thought about throwing it away. But I didn't. When I got home, Callum was in his room, building something with Legos. Did you have a good day? I asked. He nodded. We played dodgeball in PE. He didn't ask about Lionel. He hadn't brought him up since the party. It was like he already understood something I was still trying to figure out. That night, after he went to bed, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the porch with the receipt in my hand. I stared at it under the porch light. The ink looked darker at night. More serious. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do with this knowledge. Visit him? Let him say goodbye? Pretend it didn't change anything? Or maybe it didn't have to change anything at all. Maybe it was just information. Heavy, painful information. But not a command. Still, something gnawed at me. Not because I missed him. Not because I wanted to forgive him. But because it felt unfinished. Like a book I hated but still needed to finish just to see how it ended. The next few days passed in a strange sort of limbo. I'd wake up, get Callum ready for school, pour my coffee, answer work emails, make dinner. Everything looked normal on the outside. But inside, I felt like I was watching my own life from behind glass. That receipt, still on the counter, now held in place by the salt shaker, was like a wound that refused to close. I didn't talk to anyone about it. Not even my best friend, Nora, who would have probably told me to leave the past in the past and focus on Callum. Maybe she'd be right. But this wasn't just the past anymore. It was showing up in real time, ugly and unwanted. On the night of May 6th, 3 days after I spoke with Darcy, I got a call. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer it. Something told me I'd regret it if I didn't. It was a nurse. From a hospital in MT Pleasant. Lionel had been admitted that morning. Liver and kidney failure. He's asking for his daughter, she said gently, as though softening the words might make them easier to swallow. I sat on the edge of the couch with the phone pressed to my ear and my feet numb. I haven't spoken to him in years, I said. He's not really. He's not a father to me. I understand, she replied. But he's asking. He said you might not come, and that'd be okay. He just wanted me to try. That try sat heavy in my chest. I didn't go that night. I didn't want Callum to wake up to an empty house or have to explain to him why I was driving off in the middle of the night to see someone I'd told him wasn't part of our lives. But I didn't sleep either. I stared at the ceiling and thought about everything I remembered about my father, and everything I didn't want to remember. Lionel wasn't physically abusive, but he was something worse in some ways, emotionally absent, hot and cold, always the center of the storm. You never knew what version of him you'd get. When he was in a good mood, he was charming, loud, the kind of person people gravitated toward at parties. When he was in a bad mood, which was more often than not, he went dark. Sarcastic, cruel, dismissive. My mother withered under that darkness for years. So did I, until I left. He was the kind of man who once told me at 16, "You're not that special, you know. You'll see one day." And now here he was, dying in a hospital, asking for me. By the time the sun came up, I'd already made the decision. I called Nora and asked if she could pick up Callum after school. I didn't give her the full story, just said I had to visit someone in the hospital and I wasn't sure how long it would take. She didn't press. She just said, "Of course." The hospital was about a half-hour drive away. I took back roads and avoided the highway, not because of traffic but because I needed the quiet. I needed to think. When I walked into the hospital room, I didn't recognize him at first. He was small. Shrunken in a way I didn't expect. His skin had turned a waxy shade of yellow, and his cheeks were sunken. The leather jacket was gone. So were the sunglasses and the swagger. He looked like a man who had run out of time. His eyes opened when I stepped closer, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if he even knew who I was. But then he smiled. A small, weak thing. "Didn't think you'd come," he rasped. I didn't answer. I pulled up the chair next to his bed and sat down. Not too close. Just enough. He stared at the ceiling for a few seconds before speaking again. "I deserved everything you said. And everything you didn't." Again, I said nothing. I wanted him to talk. To say whatever it was he needed to say. Because for once in his life, he didn't have control. And I didn't owe him anything. "I tried, you know," he said after a long pause. "Tried to stop drinking. Got as far as pouring it down the sink one time. Then I'd just go out and buy more." I kept my arms crossed, waiting. "I wasn't built right," he said softly. "Didn't know how to be a husband. Or a father. Though if I made people laugh, it'd make up for everything else." He turned his head toward me. "I messed up with you. With her. With everyone." A nurse stepped in briefly to check his for. I used the moment to stand and walk to the window. I needed space. The weight of his voice made the air feel too thick. When the nurse left, I didn't sit down again. "You hurt people," I said, finally. My voice was steady, but I felt like I was speaking through a storm inside me. "You ruined things you never tried to fix. You were cruel when it mattered most." He nodded. "Yeah." We sat in silence for a while. Then he looked over and whispered, "Do you remember that time I took you to Folly Beach?" I blinked. That was decades ago. I was maybe 7 or 8. "You had that blue kite," he said. "Wouldn't let go of it. Kept running up and down the sand yelling, 'It's touching the sky.'" I didn't want to remember that day. Not because it was bad, but because it wasn't. Because it was one of the few times he wasn't terrible. And those are sometimes harder to carry. "I remember," I said quietly. He smiled again, his eyes glassy now. "That's the only time I felt like I was doing something right." I wanted to hate him more than I did at that moment. But all I felt was tired. He closed his eyes, whether from pain or exhaustion I couldn't tell. I stood there for a while, watching the monitors beep and the four drip, and I wondered how someone could take up so much space in your life and still leave you feeling empty. Before I left, I pulled the receipt from my coat pocket and placed it on the table next to his bed. No words. No final hug. No dramatic goodbyes. Just that, what he gave me. Let him see it one more time. When I left the hospital, I didn't cry. I thought I would. I thought maybe something would crack open inside me after all that time, all those words I never got to say when I was younger. But the tears didn't come. Just a kind of stillness. Heavy, but not sharp. Like my body had already done all the grieving it needed to do, just years before it was ever given permission. I sat in the car with the engine off for almost 20 minutes. I watched people walk past with flowers in plastic sleeves, balloons bobbing on thin strings, cards in hand. People hoping for recovery. People hoping for something to hold on to. But I wasn't there for hope. I was there to confirm something I'd already known for most of my life, that some people never change. They just run out of time before they can do more damage. When I got back home, Callum was on the living room floor sorting through a bucket of mismatched Lego pieces. Nora was on the couch flipping through a magazine. "You okay?" she asked, not pushing, just softly checking. I nodded. "Yeah. I just needed to see it for myself." She gave me a look like she wanted to ask more but decided against it. She just stood and said, "Text me if you need anything," and hugged me on her way out. Callum looked up at me, holding a half-built spaceship. "Did you have to go far?" "Not too far," I said, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "Just somewhere I needed to go." He didn't press. I think, even at 10, he sensed that it was something deeper than a quick errand or a routine visit. Kids are intuitive like that. They just don't always have the language for it. Later that evening, after dinner and dishes, after Callum went to bed and the house fell quiet again, I found myself wandering into the garage. There, on the top shelf, was an old plastic bin I hadn't opened in years. I dragged it down, sat cross-legged on the cold floor, and started sorting through it. Photographs. Old notebooks. A small wooden jewelry box that belonged to my mother. A faded postcard from Myrtle Beach with no message on the back. A cassette tape labeled Christmas 1997. And then, near the bottom, a folder stuffed with legal pads. My mother's handwriting, cramped and hurried, notes about groceries and appointments and bills. A few pages of journal entries. That's what stopped me. I hadn't read her handwriting in so long. I traced her letters with my finger like they were sacred. One entry, in particular, made me pause. "Callie asked me today why her daddy didn't come to her recital." I didn't know what to say. I told her he got stuck at work. She looked down at her shoes and said, "That's okay. I only messed up the spin part anyway." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her she was perfect. But I just held her and told her I was proud. God, I hope one day she understands this isn't her fault. I didn't remember that recital. But I remembered the feeling. The sharp ache of looking out into the crowd and seeing an empty seat where he said he'd be. I held that page in my hand for a long time. Lionel hadn't just failed me, he failed my mother. Over and over again. And still, she had tried. Until she couldn't anymore. And maybe, in some twisted way, so had he. Or maybe he just told himself that near the end because regret is easier to sit with than responsibility. Either way, there wasn't going to be some magical healing. No cinematic closure. Just pieces of truth, scattered through old receipts, whispered hospital visits, and dusty boxes in garages. That night, I sat on my bed and wrote a letter. Not to Lionel, but to Callum. I didn't plan to give it to him now. Maybe not for years. But I wanted him to have it someday. To know the truth. To understand where he came from, not in a way that would poison him, but in a way that might protect him. I wrote about the birthday party. About the cake. About the man who used to be my father. I wrote about how sometimes people who are supposed to love us don't know how. And that it's not our job to fix them. And I wrote about him, my son, my light. How he had already broken a cycle just by being who he is. How proud I was. How deeply, fiercely I loved him. The days that followed were calm, eerily so. I went back to my routine, but something inside me had shifted. The kind of shift you don't notice right away until your reflection starts looking a little more sure of itself. A little lighter. I didn't visit Lionel again. I didn't call to check in or send a card. There was nothing else to say. I stood in front of him, let him speak, listened, even offered silence instead of rage. That was more than he ever gave me growing up. But I wasn't done. Not really. The birthday party incident had lingered like a sour smell in the corners of my life. Even after I cleaned the frosting out of the rugs and the glitter from under the baseboards, the humiliation he caused my son never left me. And the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. He'd orchestrated that. Laughed at it. Used a child's milestone as his personal stage for one last performance. So I decided, finally, that if he wanted to leave this world remembered, I'd make sure that happened, just not in the way he expected. I didn't want cruelty. I didn't want screaming confrontations or courtroom drama. I wanted something better. I wanted to dismantle the version of himself he still believed was lovable. And so I started small. The local paper in Charleston, the Post and Courier, has a section called Legacy Reflections. People write about family members, short tributes, memories, small stories that sum up a person's life. I wrote one. I kept it honest. Sharply so. Lionel James Croft, once the life of the party, is remembered best by those who witnessed the silence he left in his absence. A man of great charisma and small apologies, Lionel had a unique talent for disappearing when it mattered most. His legacy, though rarely visible in photo albums, lives on through the hard-earned wisdom of those he disappointed. Some people teach you how to love. Others teach you who not to become. I submitted it under my name. No aliases. No hiding. It ran in the Sunday paper the week after I heard he'd slipped into hospice care. I don't know if he ever saw it. I hope he did. But that wasn't all. I found the bakery, Butter and Whisk, the one he'd paid off to rig the cake with some kind of prank mechanism. I asked to speak with the manager. She was younger than me, kind-faced, clearly embarrassed as soon as I explained what had happened. He told us it was for a gender reveal prank, she said, wide-eyed. We had no idea it was for a kid's birthday. I'm so sorry. I could tell she meant it. She offered to refund me for the cake, but I waved it off. Actually, I said, I have a better idea. I asked if they'd consider sponsoring the next kids' event at the local community center, the one Callum and I go to for swim lessons. They had a big summer fair planned, and I knew they were short on funds. The bakery jumped at the idea. And that summer, Butter and Whisk showed up with 5 beautiful cakes, dozens of cupcakes, and a banner that read, "Sweet memories matter most." In honor of better birthdays, they never mentioned Lionel. But I did. I told a few of the moms at the event what had happened, told them how a grown man tried to use a child's birthday as a stage for bitterness. Word spread, not in a vindictive way, but in a let's not be those people kind of way. His name quietly became a cautionary tale in that circle. The man who brought a receipt as a gift. The man who tried to ruin a 10-year-old's birthday with a cake stunt and ended up outed in his own obituary. But the most satisfying part? Callum forgot about him. Completely. By the time school started again, Lionel was just that weird guy from my party once. He didn't ask where he went. Didn't mourn. Didn't wonder. And I didn't remind him. One day, maybe, when Callum is older and ready, he'll read that letter I tucked away in his photo album. Maybe he'll ask more questions. And when he does, I'll be honest. But for now, he gets to grow up without the weight of inherited disappointment. Without that shadow over his birthday candles. And me? I finally feel done. Not angry. Not bitter. Just done. There's a deep, strange peace in that. Lionel left the world the way he lived in it, without apology, without change, and under the illusion that charisma could mask character. But I left his world with my head high, my son intact, and my dignity sharpened. And for once, I wasn't the one holding the disappointment. He was.